Hello and welcome to Carfection News, where today we're going to be talking all about the brand new 911 GT3, the 992 generation. Now normally obviously I would hope to go out and have a walk around in this car with Andreas Proninger, but because of the situation that we are all in, I can't do that. However, I have already had a passenger ride in the prototype, and I think most of you have hopefully seen that film. If not, then click on the link which we'll put in the description. But we've got the full spec of the car now, so I've been through that, looked at the previous generation car and compared it to various other things, and yeah, I thought we'd have a bit of a tech rundown, so you've got all the details in one place, hopefully. Let's start with colours, because I mentioned Guards Red in the press release, but also Shark Blue. And it's a really lovely colour, it's a flat colour, non-metallic. It adds to the whole sort of aggression of this car, because it really is so much more aggressive than not only the base 992, which can look sort of a little bit bloated, particularly around the rear at times, whereas this, it all seems to have been sort of pared back, and they've really taken the scalpel to it. And it looks the most RS, I think, that any standard GT3 has looked before. So it's that sort of with good reason, really. It'll be interesting, by the way, because they're going to release a touring of this, and I'm intrigued to see how this really aggressive GT3 then translates into a sort of perhaps slightly softer touring body without all the aero addenda. Anyway, coming on to the aero, the rear diffuser, if you compare that with the previous one, it really is, it looks so much more aggressive, and it really is. It generates 4 times the downforce of the old cars. The new car generates about 50% more downforce in its factory settings, but you can obviously change the rear wing, and if you put it into its performance settings, then increase by as much as 150% more downforce than the old car at 124 miles an hour. That's 200 kilometers an hour. A couple of interesting things. I looked at the overall width of this compared to the previous generation, and without the mirrors it's identical, 1852 millimeters in width. Include the mirrors and that goes up by 49 millimeters over the old car. So with the mirrors, yes, a bit more, but overall, curiously, actually identical. Same wheelbase as the 991, but the tracks are up 50 millimeters at the front, and they're actually down 2 millimeters according to the spec sheets at the rear. Suspension. Now that's probably the biggest talking point about this new generation car, because out go the McPherson struts at the front, and in comes a double wishbone setup. It's all ball joints at the front, and the whole reason for having double wishbones is basically better camber control, and therefore you've got more consistent contact between the tyre and the tarmac or racetrack when cornering. The other interesting thing, which I hadn't seen mentioned in any of the sort of blurb, but was when you compare the specs side by side, steering ratio. So you've got a variable rack in there, but around the dead ahead, it's quite significantly quicker. So the old car was 17.15 to 1, whereas the new car is 14.2 to 1. So that's really quite a bit quicker in terms of the steering around the straight ahead. Rear wheel steering as well is standard on this GT3. Brakes, they're up from 380 millimeters at the front, so you get stills as standard, and then PCCP is an option. But they're up to 408 millimeters at the front, but they're 17% lighter. So that's pretty cool, because it's obviously unsprung mass. Wheels, well, so we had 20 inches at the front and 20 inches at the rear on the old car. It's now 20 inches at the front and 21 at the rear, so like the previous generation RS. Tyres are also wider by 10 millimeters front and rear, so up to 255s on the front and 315s at the rear. Engine. It's effectively the engine from the Speedster in the 991 generation. But the big thing is that they've managed to keep it. It is still naturally aspirated, and I think that is to be applauded. So it revs to 9,000 RPM. The rev counter actually goes all the way around to 10,000 RPM, a bit more on that in a moment. Power is up to 510 PS, which is 503 brake horsepower, and that's at 8,400 RPM. That's up 10 brake horsepower on the outgoing GT3. Torque, 470 Newton meters or 347 pounds-foot at 6,100 RPM, and that's up 10 Newton meters or 7 pounds-foot on the old car. The change with this compared to the sort of the previous GT3, we've now got individual throttle bodies now. ITBs are just cool, basically, aren't they? I think we can all agree on that. But apparently, I saw an interview with Andreas, and he was saying that they had a sort of a dual effect. So they're great for response, but also they had really good effect on the emissions actually. So it was a win-win for the individual throttle bodies, which is great. There are of course gas particulate filters in the exhaust, but even so, somehow they've managed to get this new exhaust weighing 10 kilos less than the old car, and obviously that's all at the rear of the car where generally you want to take the mass out of in a 911. Talking of lightweight, the 992 weighs very clearly obviously more than the old 991 as a platform, but they work really hard to take weight out. Now I've already mentioned the brakes and the unsprung mass there. There's a battery in a lithium iron phosphate battery which weighs 10 kilos less than the battery in the old GT3. The front boot lid, which talked about, that is now made of carbon fibre. And we've talked before about the reason for having the two prominent nostrils in there, which they had to move up to that lid because they couldn't have it in front of there because it's a slightly longer lid and they just wouldn't have got the air up and out. And actually forming that out of carbon fibre was the best way for them to do that, but it has the added benefit of being lighter and being carbon fibre. Lightweight glass, like on the previous RS as well. Lighter cover for the rear seat compartment, so the sort of where there would be rear seats in a GT3, the coverings over that they've managed to make lighter. There's an optional carbon fibre roof, and as I mentioned before, options of having the PCCB, the Porsche ceramic composite brakes. So despite being physically a bigger car, manual weighs 1,418 kilos. That's 5 kilos up on the previous car, so I mean hardly anything at all. And the PDK is 1,434 kilos, which is only up 4 kilos on the outgoing car. If you do add the Club Sport pack on it, then that adds I think about 15 kilos back in because you get the half cage in the back of the car. But obviously if you're going on track a lot, then you know, safety and all that. With that in mind, performance. So we've always got two lots of performance figures here because you can have the car with a manual gearbox, hurrah, 6-speed manual gearbox, or you can have it with a PDK. It's a 7-speed PDK, so it's the box we're used to from the previous generation GT3, not the 8-speed that is in all the 992s at the moment, and that has a knock-on effect which we'll talk about the interior in a bit. Manual 0 to 62 in 3.9 seconds, 0 to 100 7.9 seconds, and 0 to 124 in 11.9 seconds. So that's all pretty much identical. Actually, a couple of slightly slower, I think, than the previous generation car, and it tops out at 320 kilometers an hour, which I think is 199 miles an hour. I know that because I once hit 320 kilometers an hour on the autobahn, and everybody said, "Why didn't you hang on for 200?" There we are. Can't think why it didn't occur to me. 0 to 62 miles an hour for the PDK is 3.4, so good chunk. That's half a second quicker than the manual, but obviously that's, you know, if you're buying the manual, you're not doing it just for pure speed, you're doing it for other reasons. 0 to 100 7 seconds dead, and 0 to 124 in 10.8 seconds. So pretty much all but identical to before, and top speed actually you lose a couple of kilometers an hour, so it's 318 kilometers an hour overall, so I think it's 198 miles an hour as a top speed. But the straight line numbers do not tell the full performance story with this car, or rather perhaps they sort of set up the story, I suppose, because given that it is effectively identical in terms of its straight line speed, then it makes what I'm about to say even more impressive, because they have released a Nürburgring lap time, and we've got some footage of that as well. dipped under 7 minutes, which is, I mean, astounding. It still seems crazy to me. It sort of doesn't seem that long ago we were talking about dipping under 8 minutes as being incredible. So dipping under 7 minutes, amazing. And apparently Jörg Bergmeister, who was there as well, this was done in testing, so they didn't go for a specific sort of record run. Jörg Bergmeister was there as well, and he set very similar lap times to that and did it back to back, so simultaneous laps, just kept going. So it's a consistent pace, but more interesting than just dipping under 7 minutes, because that was on the 20.8 kilometre full circuit. But in the past, they've only just started really using that full circuit actually for times. They used to use the 20.6. They cut out 200 metres around T13 and the pits where they all start from. And that was what most of the times sort of in recent years have been recorded over. And the time for that is 6 minutes 55.2. So that makes it 17.5 seconds quicker than the previous GT3, which is pretty incredible, given that we know it's not really any quicker in a straight line, but it's also 1.2 seconds quicker than the previous generation GT3 RS. And that's even more impressive because the GT3, you can get it with Cup 2R tyres now, and the GT3 RS set its time on Cup 2R tyres as well, and the GT3 RS actually has 10mm wider tyres front and rear, and it's got a tiny bit more power and torque as well, or certainly more power than the GT3. So, and it's obviously got a bigger rear wing. So basically all of this then comes down to, I think it shows just how impressive the new aero with that swan neck rear wing and that rear diffuser, how impressive that is on the new GT3, but also how much you're gaining from having this double wishbone front suspension. I have to say, with the suspension, I had a passenger riders in the prototype, and what I noticed was certainly the lateral grip felt enormous in that prototype, and yet you still had arguably even more compliance in the suspension. You could tell that even sitting in the passenger seat, you can just tell how hard you're cornering. Coming on to the interior, well, we've got obviously the lovely 992 interior, which we know you can already sit really low in that. It's extraordinary how low you can get the seat, so it's a really good basis for it. It's that's something I think will translate well to the touring, because we've got screens. It feels like a slightly more luxury interior generally. The screen can be had in a track screen, so you can take away most of the information on that and just have the central rev counter, which say goes all the way around to 10,000 RPM. We've got shift lights on there as well, so they sort of build up around the edge of that rev counter in yellow lights, and then they flash blue, which they say is going to be easier to see. It should just be in your peripheral vision, basically, so you can look down the track and you'll just be aware of when to shift, rather than having to really look down for some of the little LEDs that you have on other things. It's not hidden away at all. Because we've got the 7-speed PDK, it meant they could have a proper shifter back in there, so you've got the little toggle in most 992s with their 8-speed dual clutch gearbox, but this has got a proper shifter, so you can knock it across and have sort of forwards for down, pull it back for coming up, use it like a sequential shifter. It looks actually, when it's just normally sitting there, very much like a manual gear lever. So there we are. Other things, well, that's really pretty much it. Oh, there is a watch, talking of the interior, because there's a photograph of this watch in the interior, and so it's as watches go. I think it actually looks really rather nice, and it's made of titanium, or at least the case is, and because they say that's like the conrods in the engine, made of titanium. So, and the individual winding rotor is reminiscent of the wheels of the 911 GT3, which again, instantly, I think the wheel design is most sort of aggressive. You can see the delineation from previous wheels, but they was a bit softer, a bit sort of rounder in the spokes, but these are much sharper and crisper and spindlier. Coming back to watch, you can have the ring around the outside edge in the colours of whatever 911 GT3 you have, and you do have to buy the GT3 in order to be able to buy the watch, apparently. So that means you're going to have to shell out in the UK £123,100 in order to buy a GT3, and then you can buy the watch as well. So there we are. Those are the details of the new 992 GT3. Let us know in the comments below what you think about it. Is it going far enough? Should they have just ditched the whole naturally aspirated thing, gone turbocharged, really gone chasing performance with this, or are they right to stick with a naturally aspirated engine? Do you think there's enough of a change? Is this double wishbone, does it excite you, does it not? Do you just think, well, frankly, I'd just buy a 991 GT3? I'd love to know what you think of the looks, and thank you very much indeed for watching. We'll see you next time.